All right, folks, it's time for another edition of the radio show with Mark Lee, and definitely got some amazing guests that'll be joining us and having some great conversation. Hope everybody is doing well on this particular day. It is definitely a warm day here in North Carolina, and you can expect that in the middle of June. As a matter of fact, later on in the 1st of July, when I hit that 61st birthday, that'll also be the time of the whole thing that goes on that I am part of, which is the whole notion of the Festival that takes place at one of our state parks, and I am usually involved in that as one of the MCs. So I know that I'll be there possibly on my birthday, if not definitely on the 4th of July, and maybe even on both days, because that is a event that takes place here in Durham, North Carolina, and it's always a fun event that a number of folks enjoy going to, and all in that kind of way. So definitely hoping everybody's having a great enjoyment in this time, and maybe they're trying to stay cool. Maybe they're out there enjoying some cool iced tea, or maybe some fresh lemonade, or something else to keep them refreshed. I know a number of people that actually had today off, as today was Juneteenth, and all in that space. So that is something that was going on. I think the stock market was closed, and some other things were happening in that space. So folks were definitely remembering that historical moment in time, and using this time to celebrate. I know that I was part of two Juneteenth activities, one that was on Friday at the Hayti Heritage Center, a cultural arts center that I work at, and they were having a event all day on, or all afternoon, I should say, afternoon into the evening. I think it was like from 3 until 9 or 3 until 10, and all in that space, and even featured a well-known hip-hop artist, because apparently Terminator X lives here in the area, and some folks will remember him from Public Enemy, but he definitely gave some of the performances, as did a youth choir, and that youth choir also had some steel drums that was part of the performance as well, and there were a number of vendors, good food that was out there, and all in that space. And then on Saturday, I went to the one that's been going on for a number of years that Spectacular Magazine puts on. I went out there in the afternoon after I had stopped by the Hayti Center earlier in that day. And then later in that evening, there was a poetry slam, but definitely the one that was going on in a area not that far from downtown Durham featured some good music, plenty of food trucks, and it definitely got a chance to sample them, as well as some of the vendors that were there also. So that's some of what was going on in my life on this particular weekend, and all in that space. But I'm going to bring in first my author, and I've got another guest as well, but I'm going to bring in Steve, and all in that space. So how are you doing, Steve? Where are you calling in from, and how are you doing on this particular day? Because like I said earlier, it's been a little bit on the warm side. I was glad to get out to those events, and with the pandemic, it's good to get out and about, but definitely the summer weather can be a little bit challenging, particularly since we like our humidity. Not really, but we do have it here in Durham, North Carolina, and all in that space. So definitely, I was wondering if you could share a little bit about what you've got going on, and what's happening in your world, and how you are coping with this June weather.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's nice to be here. And I'm calling in from Southwest Colorado. And I am enjoying some nice weather today also. It's not as hot as where you're at, of course. I used to live in North Carolina for a short time, but yeah, I can relate to the humidity and all that too. But everything is going well right now. I am going to be continuing to talk about my book, and
Right.
the purpose of the book, and how it came to be, and
Yeah, definitely want to get to that and everything. One of the things I was curious about, and then definitely want to get to the book as well, is what brought you to Colorado from North Carolina and some of your other travels, and was Colorado always on your destination list of places that you thought that you would be going to, or is this something that came about later in life and actually surprised you? Because I have a friend of mine that is from the Denver area, is oftentimes talking about how beautiful that area is and everything. I have another friend that lives in Las Vegas area and also works in Arizona. And I have not done enough of the West Coast travel as I probably should. As the furthest west I've been has been to Nevada, and I have not been to either California, Oregon, what the state of Washington or any of those places, even though they are definitely on my list and all in that space. So maybe share a little bit about that journey for you.
Well, I came out to Colorado in 2012, and I had finished. I went back to college and got my degree in sociology and media studies, and then after my two kids headed off to college, I was on my way out west. I think like most little boys, they want to be cowboys. I saw enough cowboy movies when I was young, and my father used to like westerns, and it's always been a fantasy to come out and experience the West, and that's what I did. And as I said, I came out in 2012, and I landed here in the winter. It was the February, March when I came out, and I experienced a lot. I got to do a lot of things. When I got here, I didn't want to really get into that. It's no big deal, but I had met a woman online who I was to meet out in Colorado, and I did. And she was a wonderful lady. We didn't hit it off romantically or anything like that. It was a lot different for some reason, being on the internet and then actually meeting some people in person. It's something changed, I guess. I don't know. But again, she was a wonderful woman. And I said, once I got out to Colorado and saw all the mountains and the Rockies and the people out here, I wanted to stay. I wanted to come out here and live. And so I did. And I came back I'm originally from New York, upstate New York, and in a farm, it was a city, but it was kind of a farm community too on the outskirts, way up there in upstate New York near the Finger Lakes. But so I got to Colorado, worked a few jobs, worked at a robotics company. I loved photography, took a lot of pictures while I was out here. And eventually I volunteered to work at a horse rescue and also a horse hippotherapy ranch, which helps people who have traumatic brain injury or autism. Hippotherapy is working with horses and sitting on them while a therapist works with the patient, and it works miracles. I've seen some stuff that I couldn't understand. Once these people got on a horse, it stimulated them, and some even talked a little bit in relation to their injuries and stuff. It really, horses are wonderful. So after that, I've always loved horses, and then I finally decided to advertise to work on horse ranches on the internet. Horse Groom, Horse.com, a bunch of these places. And within a couple of days, I got a job offer up in Idaho. So I accepted that job, and I worked up there for a short time. And every time I was finishing up at one ranch, I got an offer. The timing seemed to work out pretty good with a lot of them. But I crisscrossed the country from coast to coast, from Idaho and Washington State all the way to Texas. I worked on different horse ranches, and I actually was able to, on my disability that I get from New York State, I was able to, in conjunction with that income, I was able to work these horse ranches, numbers of horse ranches, and see the country. I traded work for rent on these horse ranches, and it was a wonderful experience. So
I can relate to a couple of things that you were saying and everything, including the aspect of going out and trying to pursue a date and all in that space, in that dating lane. Because I know that the one newspaper job that I had that was in the daily lane was actually in Florida, and that was actually in Boca Raton, Florida, and all along those spaces. And I had a crush on a young lady at that particular time in the late 80s and all in along those kind of ways. And I was thinking that I was going to get closer to her, not realizing the geographic distances that exist in all of that space. Because I was thinking Boca Raton, Miami, it's around the corner. Not quite the case, and everything is a little bit further along than I was expecting. And I don't know that the interest was the same in that sense and all in that space. So I was only there for less than probably 5 or 6 months, but that is part of the reason of moving there, is because I thought that I was going to get closer to that particular young lady. And then when I got to Boca Raton, I was like, oh, you mean it is still about a couple of 100 miles away and everything in that space. So yes, I was closer than North Carolina to Miami, but I still wasn't as close as I probably was picturing that I would be, and all in that space. And like I said, there might not have been a shared interest. We definitely had some friendship, but maybe not the shared romantic interest. So I can definitely relate to that part of the story. And even when you brought up the aspect of the horses, there is a group here called, I think it's Bright Star Ranches, and they do a lot of things around using horses to help autistic kids and all in that space. So I was just wondering if you could maybe share a little bit about your own observations of horses and horses as part of the therapy and the healing journey, because I do know that that program has been running here for a number of years and has definitely helped quite a few folks that are in that space.
Well, they were very important, and I didn't realize it at the time. Maybe I did. I can't quite recall. But once I got out to Colorado, and of course, I've been sober since 2005. And when I got out there, it's being lonely on the road. It can get lonely on the road, but I enjoyed that solitude. There was only occasional times when you wish you had some companionship, and I think eventually when I started working with the horses, that companionship was provided by the horses, and they're they're intuitive, and they mirror what you feel. Put it simply, and I'm sure you understand that. So that time, those days, those months, those years I spent with the horses, it helped me keep myself occupied, first of all. But the other thing was caring for someone other than myself or something. And of course, in the world of recovery, it was always told to me in my early years, and I started in 1984. It took me a number of years before my sobriety, I was able to make it stick. But I was always taught, when you're into yourself and you're feeling sorry for yourself, the pity parties, go help someone else. Go help someone else. And that is still a part of my life, helping others, dealing with recovery. But with the horses, that to be caring for the horses, and there was a mutual connection with the horses that helped me those years. I mean, I had no partner or anything. I was on my own, and again, I enjoyed it and I loved it, with the occasional, missing, my girls, my daughters and stuff. But that solitude and having the horses around, that combination, I could, I worked with the horses, grooming them, cleaning them, caring for them, feeding them, and, acting like a groom. I was pretty much a groom. And it was when these animals mirror your feelings. Like if you have some angst or you're angry or something happened, you go out and work with the horses, you're going to find out quickly how they pick up on that, and they don't feel comfortable. They, if they're not feeling comfortable, they're not cooperative, whether you have to lead them out of a paddock or move them somewheres or take them to the barn, whatever it is, they pick up on what you're feeling. And it allowed me to start paying more attention to my inner goings on, why is he resisting, or why is he so nervous? Well, something happened that morning or in the afternoon that bothered me. I hadn't let it go. I was holding on to it, and the horses pick that up. They mirror that. If I'm nervous or angry, they're agitated, and you sense it. It's a very simple thing that occurs when whatever you're feeling. So most of the time, it goes without saying, I made sure that I was in a good mood when I was around the horses, and if I wasn't, I'd find out what's bothering me and think, okay, what's bothering me? Okay, I didn't pay my bills. I talked to someone on the phone. They upset me. Well, you learned how to let those little things go. Sometimes, it wasn't easy, but before you got out there with the horses, at least for me, that's what I would do. I would make sure my mind is clear and I was in a good mood. And I learned a lot of that from the woman that I worked for in Colorado. She at the horse rescue, not the hippotherapy ranch, but the horse rescue, taught me how to work with horses, and she was a very good teacher.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Sounds like it definitely is going to bring in the other guests that I've got as well and everything. But just really quickly, tell me about the book that you have and that book journey, because definitely a lot of people have gone through recovery of different levels, whether that is recovery around drugs or alcohol, or that's recovery around a number of the other addictions, including food addictions that exist out there as well. So I just wondered if you could share a little bit about the nature of the book and what the message and purpose of you're hoping to gather to other people through the book.
Well, Mark, this is the book. It's time to go. I don't know if the reflection there is not good or whatever, but it's time to. I'm sorry, that was my other book. This book is it's an inside job, kid. Sorry about that.
No problem.
And the title for that has an interesting story, because when I first came into the program in 1984, I was working in corrections up in upstate New York, at one of the maximum prisons up in Attica and Elmira and a couple other places. And it got so bad, my drinking and drug use during my employment with the state, that they gave me a choice. Either I go to a rehab or I'm out the door. So it didn't take a leap of faith to understand what I needed to do. Yeah. And this title, it's an inside job, kid. I had chose that for a title because of a man I had been helped by in the program. And he's long since passed away, Bob Judge. Wonderful guy. When I met him in 84, he was about 80 years old. And he had quite a bit of experience. He'd been in AA since the late 40s. So he'd been around a while. When it got to the 80s, when I first met him in 1984, I was struggling. And like many other people who come into the program, you've got mentors and you've got people that want to help you. And Bob took a liking to me, and I don't know how he tolerated me, because I was in such denial in those first years of being an alcoholic, that they tolerate that. They get that. They've seen it plenty of times before when someone comes up and they know you're in denial. But Bob, I was with him one evening, and I was really struggling with something, a little anger and a little confusion, and seeking a little advice when I spoke up at the meeting. And he stopped me afterwards, after the meeting, and he talked with me about the issue that I brought up. And then the final thing he said to me was, he looked me right in the eye and he said, "It's an inside job, kid." And that stuck with me ever since. And at first I thought, what are you talking about, robbing a bank? I mean, I was a corrections officer, so my thinking is that, what do you mean it's an inside job? And then I said, it's an inside job, kid. And then I finally started getting what he was meaning. You got to go within. And that's how I came up with the title. In this book, it helped me because I got a lot of what I had inside that never got out, or never allowed out. I expressed in the book, and it's very detailed, and it's very personal, and it's very intimate. And my idea for this was just, you're only as sick as your secrets, as they say. And I put most everything out in that book that I thought would encourage others to tell their story and speak up and know that they're not alone. And that was the main thrust of my book, and why I print it, and why I put so much money into putting it out there. Publishing and stuff, that the publishing industry, the book industry, you really find out how to navigate through this, and finding someone to publish your book and all that. And that was another aspect what I didn't want to get bogged down in. But mostly, this book is for families of people who are struggling with addiction or mental illness. Mental illness is a big part of this because I had been diagnosed with PTSD and bipolar depression. That's it, kind of goes hand in hand. And so this book, I put my heart into it, and I hope that others read it, and I hope that it encourages them or inspires them to get help for themselves.
Definitely along those same lines, you brought up a couple of interesting points. One is the aspect of mental health, and I know that last month was Mental Health Awareness Month, and all in that kind of space. And a lot of people have been thinking about this as we have been dealing with the pandemic, and it has definitely done a number on a number of people's health, both mental, physical, spiritual, and a number of other health concerns. I would even add emotional to that as well. But there have been a number of programs of the Cultural Arts Center that I was talking about for a number of years. The NA was meeting there, so I know a little bit about that 12-step program and all in that space. But I was just wondering, do you think that those kind of programs are as effective as they are portrayed to be, or do you think that it is more of a internal battle that everybody has to deal with on their own kind of struggles and their own kind of ways and everything? I was just wondering your take on that, because I do know that there is the 12-step program and the whole notion of you have to admit the problem and then kind of work on yourself in those kind of spaces. But I was just wondering your thoughts about that.
Well, thanks for that question. That's a good question, Mark. Well, in the beginning for me, I was 23 years old, I think, when I was given this ultimatum at prison. And that definitely helped me. I met people in there that were really willing to stick their neck out in the sense of opening up themselves and sharing parts of their life so you wouldn't feel alone. That really made a difference with me, that someone could share that, and then you would share a little. And as far as the program of AA, it's been around for quite a while, back in the 30s. So I think, first of all, there's different paths to sobriety, and it's kind of whatever works for you. I believe in the spirituality part, and I recall when I first got in the program, the old timers didn't want to talk about spirituality. It was a very personal thing to them, but yet that particular piece of the recovery program was important to me, as I'm sure as it is to everyone. But I remember being shut down a couple of times at meetings. Well, talk to your mentor or your sponsor, your Elmer, whatever. And it was kind of tough to navigate that when I was so young, because frankly, I was very immature. And all I can say is AA is a great go-to for alcoholism and problem drinking, if people want to call that. Some call it different things, and whatever suits them. If that works for them, whatever they want to call it. It's like having the higher power, whatever your higher power is. And they used to say, it could be a tree, it could be the group, whatever it is. I have my own take on my higher power, and it's not a lot different from many people who are in the program who've been in it for a while. In my experience, that you can have the personal God, the Christian God. There's others that like to use nature. For me, it's me personally. The idea of a greater power is the universe, is a blade of grass out there, anything that's living, which it's all living. I mean, I didn't know for way into my adulthood about rocks, not that they have a consciousness per se, but when you put it under a microscope, it's got movement, it's alive. That, everything. So to me, it's everything. Just to share that.
That makes a lot of sense. I want to bring in somebody that's in that wellness space as well. I've got at least two other guests, but I definitely wanted to bring in internal consciousness and all along those lines. You've been listening to some of this conversation, and I know that you had asked where the book was available. So hopefully, definitely Steve can let you know that, but definitely share a little bit about your own journey, because I know that you've been on a number of journeys in terms of that whole healing journey, finding yourself, and a number of other things. So if you can share a little bit about what you got going on in your space as well. Oh, she disappeared. She's hopefully she'll come back a little bit later and all in that space, but hopefully she'll come back. I'll also bring on Cal, and if you want to, you can definitely share where the book is located at and all in that kind of way, because that is one of the questions that she was asking, was where the book can be found and everything. So definitely, if you'll let her know as well as anybody else, and hopefully she'll come back on and all and share some of her wisdom as well. But definitely let folks know where we can find this book at.
Sure, it's Amazon and Kindle, and it's on Audible. So it's on those three. The only thing it isn't in is hardcover. So yeah, Amazon, Kindle, and Audible. And yeah, so I redesigned the cover and changed the title. Actually, it first came out as Time to Go. And the reason why I changed that was because people were thinking it was about death and dying. And so, they didn't get past the title to read the rest of the back cover or the subtitle. So that's why I changed that. But the content and all that's inside it is basically the same as the other book. And I believe in this book. And that's about all I could say for that.
No, I appreciate it. That's a lot to say and everything. We've also got a branding person that is on. Cal has definitely done a lot of work in the branding space and is definitely a brand leader and all in that kind of way. You've been hearing some of the conversation. So what are some of the ways that you would argue or that definitely have that might be in the branding space? Because I do know that you are a brand person that is very much about branding and all in that kind of way. And that is something that oftentimes authors don't always do the best job of in that space. And I would even argue sometimes that even musicians don't do the best job in the branding space as well. So I'd definitely love to hear some of your thoughts and that you are hearing within this conversation and how even branding can play an important part in the discussion as well.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me. And Steve, good to hear some of the things you're saying. Look, when you're talking about a brand, you're talking about an emotional connection between a consumer or a future consumer with either a business product or service. And so when you're this idea of this series of promises you have, it boils down to being authentic. And so you mentioned artists and creators of sorts, musicians and so forth, Mark. A lot of it is just making sure you're authentically putting yourself out there. A lot of times as a creator, we wear our hearts on our sleeve, especially for a musician, and you're putting some really tough things out there. And when the persona of you doesn't match that can be incongruent. People don't like that. They like to have that connection with you. So that's really about it. Make sure that it might seem simple, but the bio on the back of your book matches who you are, and it's not inflated or it's not different. And you want to continue to build that connection. So if someone reads Steve's book in this case and feels like they can relate a little bit, they can understand, they feel like, wow, he's been super transparent and vulnerable with us. And then you go meet him and he's a completely different guy, they're not going to buy it anymore. Like, and not buy the book physically, but like, they're not going to buy into his philosophy. And so that's a really important phase. And I think people don't take personal brands as seriously as they should.
No, that makes a lot of sense. As you were saying that, I was wondering, because a lot of times that notion of vulnerability and being very vulnerable, being very open is something that oftentimes authors have a hard time with, but even some of the leaders of our community have a hard time with as well. So I was wondering if you could share some of your thoughts around the importance of vulnerability, and definitely if Steve wants to jump in as well, because it seems to me that he had to bare his soul, and I think that is something that is a part of what it goes on to both entrepreneurships and the creatives as well. But I just wondering how important is it for us to be, I've heard this phrase, authentic and truly authentic, and to definitely even reveal those warts, because we are all made up as humans of folks that have the good and those things that we like to highlight that are the pretty part of our picture and everything, but we all have the warts, whether we want to admit them or not, and all in that space. So I'll start with you, Kyle, but definitely want to hear from Steve as well. How important is it for us to be truly authentic and truly vulnerable?
Well, vulnerability is, Brene Brown says that vulnerability isn't an act of weakness, it's actually the truest sign of courage. And I believe that to be true. I believe that as leaders, as people, as men, in this case, just the three of us, I know you were about to have a female guest on, I don't know what happened to her, but I think it's critically important for us. It's almost incumbent upon us. We all seem to be a little bit, older. Um, this machismo that maybe our parents' generation grew up with is just kind of BS. And like you just said it, Mark, that a lot of us deal with things with warts and all. And that's where I think true life happens. When you can get to relate with people, interact with people on that level, you can actually, get to know somebody. You can actually move mountains that way, I believe. And so it's about opening up. Men have a very difficult time with this. I heard Steve, you say that, some mental health struggles. I deal with the same. And so when you see men who are trying to button it up and portray themselves as they have it all together, one, it's inauthentic, because two, they're not being vulnerable. And so if you can release yourself a little bit from that grip of struggle and that shame that the world puts on us for that, and realize that most of us do suffer on some part of the spectrum of having some sort of like imposter syndrome on one end and all the way down to depression and anxiety and suicidal tendencies on the other. You can just open yourself up and realize most people have dealt with some sort of shame or depression or anxiety or some sort of thing in the past, and literally just unlocking that story can happen by you talking about yourself and your story. And I find that to be true myself, and it seems like you guys do as well.
Yeah. Definitely, Steve, what is your thoughts around that? And one thing that I would add to that is that sometimes we as men can be a little bit timid about revealing our woes and things that we are concerned about. I know that there are a number of men that go through therapy and are proud of the therapy that they go through, but there are others that have that male ego that they feel that they can solve the problem on their own and they don't need to go to a mental health doctor or a therapist or a number of other things in that space, and that they want to have that kind of macho kind of attitude, kind of what Cal was alluding to, that kind of belief that was very much out there in the times even before I was born, and definitely in the 50s and even the 60s when I was born, since born in 1962 and everything. But definitely, I was just wondering how much of that is a concern, even when you talk to other people, that there is too much of a fear of being vulnerable and revealing, particularly as men.
Well, this is a good starting point for this discussion is the authenticity of the person sharing and people in general just being authentic as a person. And of course, depending on how you were brought up, how you were raised, where you were raised, the decade you were raised. I mean, all those factors come in. But on a personal level, for me, when I wrote the book, I had a fella helping me out who was kind of a mentor to me, and there was things I wanted to put in that he thought, no, that's a little too personal. You don't want to do that. And so he's been in the industry, the publishing industry for a while, so I kind of deferred to him. But again, on my personal level, I've had. I don't think there's one person that I did chat with about the book who'd said, "Boy, you spilled your guts," you. And then my nephew, I remember, had asked me, "So why did you share those personal things? I mean, that was a really personal stuff." And I said, "Well, I did it again. I did it for myself. It was kind of a release from holding on to a lot of stuff. And a buzzword these days is let it go. And so it was my way of letting things go. And the other part of that was hoping that, again, as I said to you earlier, Mark, and I don't know if you were listening, Kyle, but to help others, let them know they're not alone, not to be afraid to come out and start talking about it, because again, we're only as sick as our secrets. I love that phrase, because there was a lot of things when I entered the program so many years ago, back in the 80s, those things you didn't talk about. And as a matter of fact, you had such pressure on you to feel like you were betraying your family by sharing things that affected you badly, whether it was violence in the home or whatever. But getting back on track to what Kyle was talking about, being authentic, and if they meet you on the street and it's not the same as here on a podcast or on TV, immediately they're going to know, and they're going to be turned off by that. They're not going to listen, obviously. So I think what I've struggled with was letting too much out. I mean, to me, I let out when I needed to let out and put in the book. And if it's too much for others, which I find some find a little too much, a little personal, that's okay, because then that's not for them. But it's for that person out there, that person who feels the shame, as Kyle was talking about, that shame. We're taught shame when we're so young, and even as adults, that creeps up into my world when I start feeling shame about things. And it's an ongoing thing for all of us, I think, to improve ourselves. And
you were just saying that, and I was going to add something to that, and then I'm going to try to bring on Penelope again in this space, and hopefully she's here with us and all along those lines. But one of the things that happens, I feel, is that too often we are fearful of expressing those things, and sometimes we also are overly expressive. I know that there have been times, because I'm definitely into the social media space and all of that, whether it's this podcasting world or whether it's things that I have written on Facebook and a number of other things. And I can tell you that there have been times that I have a younger brother, and my younger brother has gotten on my case because he has felt that I was maybe revealing too much that didn't need to be told, and all in that space. So I'm just wondering, how much of that safety zone does there need to be as well? Because there might have been something that I thought was very simple and wasn't anything that I was thinking was telling out of school. But then my younger brother and other family members have been like, well, we didn't necessarily want that out in the public and all in that space. But I just wondering how much of that is something that all of you had to deal with, and have you had to deal with it? Definitely along the lines of Penelope, I believe it is, and all in that space. But definitely, if you can share a little bit about your own story and all in that space, and whether that's something that you've had to deal with, since I've got you here as well.
Thank you for having me. Living in Philadelphia from Oregon State, actually. I actually moved in 2012 to Philadelphia. And I didn't get into EMS directly until it was about, 2016. I have a tattoo and it was kind of ironic how it all ended up. I started out, the fire department was hiring EMTs. So I decided to go to EMT school, and a close friend of mine who was a police lieutenant with the PPD, took his own life, actually. And I found out about it the day before I graduated from my EMT class. And it hit me hard, but I buried it, and I learned how to bury it, because growing up in the EMS field with my family and law enforcement, I got to see as an outsider what it was like and the toll it took, even on small town America, cops and EMS, of what you talk about and what you don't, and what you can say to your family and what you can say to your coworkers versus what you can say to the public. And it becomes a point of, you learn how to guard everything you say, to where a lot of times, like Steve said, you learn to bottle it in, and you internalize so much of it that one time, it can be either one time that's a trigger, It can be something that's going to either turn you into going for that addiction, or it's going to turn unfortunately, a lot of cops do the bullet to the head in the squad car. And it's not something, and then you get the response back of, I never knew what was going on. I didn't know he was having problems, or she, because there's a lot more stigma out there for women who are in a male dominated field to be able to express themselves. We're not allowed to cry. We're not allowed to quit. We're not allowed to get frustrated. We're not allowed to be emotional. Women are emotional, men are logical. The upbringing of a man versus a woman, and then you put a woman into a male dominated field, whether it be corrections, police, fire, EMS, dispatch, it all takes its toll the same way. Women have more tendencies to basically just scream and let it out, whereas the male counterparts are the ones that hold it in. But you have the struggle on both sides where you internalize it so much because you can't tell your coworkers. The men are supposed to be strong. You can't, you fuck up and just women are supposed to be tough because when a man's, they need to get out. And it's not even an option for them. It's just like, well, then leave. There's no support there. So you get both the day and night of the same stigmas in the same fields of occupation, but you still get the same mental health problems and the emotional problems that turn into physical ailments, that turn into a lot of your antisocial behaviors, the aggression, the anger, the anxiety, the depression. You've got your ups and downs all the time, constantly. And it's just like, you're like living in a yo-yo. And I actually was doing that with my friend. I thought I had taken care of it and dealt with it. And it took me 3 years before I exploded. And I almost took my own life because I was so depressed and didn't realize it. And nobody around me knew, or nobody around me commented on it or asked about it even. A lot of times if you work with coworkers enough, that you can pick up on signs that they're struggling with something. And it's not there. If it's not there, if you don't get a coworker that says, hey, I noticed that, are you doing okay? You seem a little like more on edge today. Are you okay? It's a simple question. I didn't get any of that. And so when I exploded, it was to the point of deep depression. And
along those same lines, I was just wondering, and this is for both you and Steve, that sometimes even in those high stress jobs, we definitely saw it during the pandemic, it can accentuate what those high stresses are, but there are certain rules that are enforced that you sometimes wonder if they are even necessary. And you alluded to, and definitely folks that are watching can see that you have the tattoos and all along those lines. And I know that there have been people in law enforcement that have faced resistance because of having dreads and a number of other kinds of things that are in their personal choice kind of space. So I was just wondering how much of that is an issue, and should it be an issue? Because I've heard of people that have lost their jobs because they were wearing tattoos, or they were having dreads, or they were having certain kinds of jewelries or other kind of things that are in that law enforcement space and in that medical space. And I was just wondering y'all's take on that. Should we be even concerned about these outward kind of symbols that exist, and that might be just people expressing themselves in whatever ways they want to express themselves?
My tattoos actually are because of a story. It's how I was able to, like how Steve took his life and his experiences and put them into a book. Mine are through my tattoos. And I've had a lot of people comment on my tattoos that have not been disrespectful. They actually thought they were very tasteful. But it was my way of releasing the grief through my art. So, his was through writing, mine was through art in a tattoo way.
Yeah. Good talk, Steve. You're going to answer as well.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I have a tattoo. That was that was when I got divorced. That was more of a that was kind of a freedom thing for me. I had been in the Navy. I loved the ocean. I love ships, and that's why I got the tattoo. And I know I would have met resistance with my my then wife. So it happened after I did that. My expression for what that's worth, but the stigma. Now my daughter, she's got tattoos that you do. I'm sorry. What was your? I didn't see your name on the screen.
It's Penelope. I put my business name instead. Sorry.
Oh, okay. No worries. Well, what Penelope was talking about, and I think Kyle was earlier, as far as stigma and everything, the mental health thing. It's kind of a, for me, the mental health thing was the bigger stigma because that was my disability in corrections. They diagnosed me with PTSD and bipolar disorder. And that was my disability. And once I went out on disability because of those factors, I felt even more stigmatized, not only because of my erratic behavior during the time I was using drugs and drinking, but now it was the stigma of having been labeled with a mental illness. And that made it difficult to get work for me personally, because I felt very self-conscious. I'm not sure if that's falling in line with what you were saying, Penelope, but there's so many things, the complications, the psychological complications and obstacles that we battle with every day. Sometimes we can be our own worst enemy.
Yeah. And along those same lines, I was going to bring a point that I know Kyle had talked about it in some other podcasts that he has been on, and I'm actually going to use another faith walk that people go on to bring in the question and all in that space, because I know that we are all made up of different kind of components. We have different belief systems. We have different, in some cases, the religions and a number of other things. And some people want to bring that into the workforce and all in that space. And sometimes they are getting some resistance from that. So, Kyle, I was just wondering how much of that is something that we can do, bring that faith walk, and if we bring it, do we also give other people some room to have theirs? I remember that a company that I still work for, Measurement Incorporated, there was a gentleman that was a Muslim gentleman, and they definitely gave him that opportunity to have his prayer hour at the time that prayer hour was going to take place for that particular faith community. So he was given that notion that he could go off into a quiet room and do the call to prayer. I think it's around midday or something along those lines. And that was something that they gave him that leeway, but not every corporation is going to do that. And not every employee is going to do that as well. So how much of that faith walk should we allow in the workplace? And I know that that's something you've talked about, Kyle, so I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'm a Christian. I follow the Lord Jesus. I think he's the shit, if you pardon my French. And for me, that's my belief system. We're all children of God, and yet I respect other people's points of view. So I'm not one to proselytize. I'm not one to say you're wrong, I'm right. I know what my faith means to me, but I also know what faith means to other people of different denominations, or of no denomination, or of a different sect of religion. And and just because you claim you're a Christian doesn't mean that you believe the same thing as the person sitting next to you claiming the same thing. We see that in today's polarizing political environment. Yeah, I do believe people should have the right and the freedom to express not just who they are, be it sexually or race or creed, whatever, but religion as well. And so that equality in the workplace is paramount importance, because you can't say you're accepting of everyone and then say, yeah, but you can't bring that to the office. So, that's my point of view. Now, where it gets dangerous is where you make exceptions for people. So you either have to be open to everybody, If we had a Muslim come in here, I'd be just as open as if it was another Christian brother or sister walked in, because I believe that we're all made of the same, substance, I guess.
Stardust.
Yeah, well, I don't believe stardust, but I get what you're saying. The cool thing is that what I've found is that the more open you are, the more you talk about things, the more you accept who you are by speaking about who you are, the more we actually can have conversation that matters. It's when you hold back who you are, whether it's, in particular, we see this, well, I'm in the South, in the US, particularly we see this down here, both religion and sexuality. When you hide who you are, that's really where it gets rough, because then it's this submersive kind of thing people are saying behind your back, or they're wondering, all that's wrong. But when you're open about it and you accept everyone, that's where dialogue can happen. That's where true change can happen, because you realize we all are actually good people at the end of the day. And so we welcome anyone into our office. I like to say that anyone's welcome at my table, because it's not my table. And so we love all folks. It's very difficult to do that in an environment that is very progressive or very conservative. You kind of have to straddle a little middle ground there, and you have to suspend your own personal belief system for the betterment of your business or your culture. That doesn't, I love every single person. We've got about 40 people here. We're in 3 different cities and 3 different states. And I love every single one of our employees. And they know what I believe because I'm authentic, but I know who they are because I ask who they are, and I support who they are. They don't have to believe what I believe. They don't have to look like me or talk like me. And that's the key. And again, it has to come from the top. We talked earlier about vulnerability and authenticity. If you don't model that, nobody will model that. So it's a slippery slope, but I think it's worth the risk.
And then along those same lines, I remember there was a major network special. It might have either been Peter Jennings or Ted Koppel. I don't remember who it was, but they were looking at the world religions, and they found that they probably have more in common than they do apart, and everything in terms of their core beliefs and all along those lines. Respect your parents, definitely respect Mother Nature, respect a number of other things, to hopefully not have any reason to murder anybody, and all into those kind of spaces. Definitely don't be robbing from your neighbor or coveting your neighbor's spouses, and a number of other very basic principles that seem to be universal in their appeal. But then there is this kind of other conversation that goes on sometimes with some of the further extremes on all religions, that is kind of the my way or the highway attitude. So I was just wondering, as a employee, how do you balance that? Because I'm thinking that as a Christian, you are probably thinking that of the whole conversation of Jesus being the way and the only way, and all in that space. But then it sounds like you have employees or people that are in your company that might be Buddhist for all I know, or Hindu for all I know, and they may not necessarily have those same kind of philosophies. It's just my own personal beliefs, and like I said, I'm not in a rush, even though I'm about to turn 61 in July, to find that end point. And everything, we all know we have a beginning and a end point, and I'm not rushing my end point, but I personally think that there might be some surprises in store for some people that have certain viewpoints at that end point, but I'm not rushing to find out anytime soon, and hopefully it will not be coming anytime soon. But I was just wondering, how do you balance that, Cal?
Yeah, the biggest thing is and you kind of said this a second ago, where all the religions kind of overlap a little bit, or even lack of religion. There's kind of a universal, we all kind of know there's universal truths out there. Kind of, be good, right? Treat people kindly. That's really what it boils down to. If you can treat people kindly, you're going to hit most of the stuff you need to worry about in the office. It sounds cliche, and I hate the phrase, but if you look at what Jesus did, like the whole WWJD, I hate that Christendom kind of like, let's monetize Jesus. But if you look at how he treated people, he didn't tell people that they were wrong. He never told people that their stuff was, they're not going to heaven. He was never polarizing. He loved people. As much talks about loving the poor more times than he talks about anything else. Well, let's agree on that, and then if you want to take your personal faith past that, good for you, just like I will on my time. So yeah, if we have a Buddhist here, if we have a Hindu here, if we have an agnostic or an atheist here, okay, tell me about what that's like for you. You don't have to be silent, but tell me about what your faith is. Tell me about if you want to. Like, there's also not a prerequisite to talk about this stuff. So I just love to be there for people, and no matter what they're going through or what they're talking about or what they might believe in. And so again, maybe I'm a fool for feeling that way, but we've won 5 best places to work awards in the last 2 years, and because we treat people that way. So I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting you brought up the notion of the Bible and the notion of the poor and treating the poor. That's actually, and he's a family friend, that kind of the argument that Reverend Barber has been making. And I know he just stepped down from the church that he had pastored for several years, even though he is still working. I think it's at Yale in their divinity school and everything. But he was revealing in one of his speeches, actually several of his speeches, that there would have been a study about religion and a study about the nature of the sermons. And ironically, that was one of the least covered things that are in the sermons that were studied. And there were like thousands, if not tens of thousands of sermons. And the whole notion of the taking care of the least of thee or protecting our poor was barely touched. As a matter of fact, it was not touched hardly at all. If you want to look at the statistical aspect of things, there were a number of other things that were covered much more and all in that space. So I was wondering.
It's hard. It's difficult to talk about that. I mean, even Jesus said to the rich young ruler, it's easier for to pass a camel through the eye of a needle than for you to inherit the kingdom of God. And he goes, well, what do I have to do? And he says, give away all your money and let's see what you. And the point was that he was bound. His God was money, and it's so hard for people to look at other people that are that society has deemed less than, either through financially or social economically, whatever it might be, and say, I'm going to reach my hand out to you. Those are the people that I think are the true leaders and pastors of this world, are the ones who are willing to take anybody to their table, and with no. The key is also with no desired outcome, not to save them, quote unquote, not to give them housing, not to do, but just to love them, see where they are. Let's meet them where they need to be met. And what are they? It's the same thing in the office. It's no different. It's just, what are you going through? Can I help you somehow? Do you want me to? Can I be part of your life and see what happens? And I think that's the hardest thing in life in general. And we've all touched on it. We've all struggled with mental health at some point. And most people don't reach out to you when you're struggling because it's scary. Most people don't, they don't want to get their hands dirty. And I think that's where we have a chance. If you're cognizant that those things exist, and we seem to be because we've experienced it ourselves, then we should help do for others what was not done to us because people didn't reach out. And so again, it doesn't matter. It's kind of religion agnostic, no pun intended. It's really like, how do you treat people? It comes down to being kind.
No doubt about that. One of the things I was curious about, and this is for everybody in the room and everything, is that there was a holiday that just recently, well, today is the holiday, even though I mentioned the celebrations that were over the weekend and everything. And there will be another one that will be coming up on the 4th of July that is about America's independence. The one that is today is Juneteenth. Of course, later on, we'll get into a number of other holidays. One of the things that frustrates me with these holidays is they become very much about the holiday brand and less about what the message is. We haven't necessarily seen a big rush on Juneteenth or Kwanzaa sales yet. That doesn't mean that won't be coming, because we know that they've got plenty of Christmas and other kind of sales. So as a person in the branding space, does that ever worry you? Because it seems to me like even with Christmas, and I was talking to a friend of mine about that, the Christmas season seems to go further and further back. And it wouldn't surprise me if Christmas doesn't start selling Christmas items in like July 4th now and everything. So I just wondered, as one in that branding space, does that ever worry you that we are seeing so many things that have become strictly about the commercial and maybe not about the message of whatever the holiday was?
Yeah. People have gotten to where, sorry about that. People have gotten to where everything's about dates, and their reactions to those dates are major. They're either happy, sad, depressed. It's a trigger for a lot of people. First responders, I can tell you right now, they're the worst triggers. Any kind of holiday, because it always involves a lot of accidents, deaths, whether it's highway, whether it's home. There's holidays seem to be the worst for first responders, because a lot of them that have to work it and it's mandated, they stress over it because they know, basically, you know what's going to hit the fan. It's preemptive, basically, and everybody knows it's going to happen. Everybody knows that on a full moon or close to the full moon, all the crazy people come out. It is what it is, and when we come to dread those, we look at the calendar and we base our, it's like, oh, it's going to be a busy weekend because this holiday's coming up. Crap, it's almost like we set our mental state to what's coming up because we already know what's going to happen, and it's frustrating because there's so many holidays, like you said.
Yeah. And along those same lines, do you ever get frustrated as a first responder? And definitely even Steve may have some thoughts about this from the prison aspect and everything, because sometimes the media glorifies some of these jobs, and I'm not saying that they don't need to be glorified, but I look at some of these shows like Blue Bloods and some of those that are in the hospital space as well, and I'm going, part of it is very soap opera-ish, and I'm not saying that doesn't happen in the real world as well, but it also sometimes
it's very in the real world.
What did you say?
It is. It's crazy. I think there's worse drama in real life than there is on TV. Yeah, it's almost like going through high school all over again.
Yeah.
It's you got your cliches, you got your groups, you've got your guys that hang out at the bar after work, you got the ones that go down to the beach for Firefighters Week down in Jersey, and everybody seems to know who's going to go before it even happens. It's always the same group of people. I think it has. And the reason why it's more dramatic in real life than on TV is because there is no script. You can't control what you're going to end up with. And these first responders have a wicked sense of humor. It's very dry, very sarcastic. You can get the one extreme or the other. But it all meshes together. When we're in the house together, it's like your family. When you're out on your personal time, a lot of people just stay to themselves, but then there's those groups that go out and hang out and get in trouble together or do whatever, get wild together. But there is a lot of drama in the houses. There's a lot of the nitpicking, the rumors, and I think a lot of it has to do with the stressors. It's their way of, they find something negative. They're already working. If they're having a bad day, they're going to find something negative to pick on. And then they seem to latch on to that, and trying to get them to let it go. Like what Steve said earlier it's near to impossible, because you get one person that latches something and they basically feed off of it and everybody's reaction to it. I have a situation at work right now where there's a conflict and literally one person is causing problems, and he's feeding off the reactions of others. And we were talking about it last night, and I said, look, you guys need to stop reacting to what he says. Just ignore him, because he's feeding off of that negative mentality and that aggression, and that everybody's at each other's throats and we're back in high school. We're grown-ups here, and we need to act like grown-ups. And they just had this blank look on their face, like, oh, well, but he said, and I'm like, I don't care what he said. Just stop feeding into it. Stop reacting. Too many people react before they think, and then that can escalate a situation to something worse than what it actually started out as. And then you got a bigger problem.
Yeah. How difficult is it to be a woman in this traditionally male field? Because you alluded to that earlier and everything. And I do know that there have been efforts to get more women in EMS and firefighting and a number of other kind of fields like that. But how successful has that been? And is that something they need more of? I know that there are some people that are all about meritocracy, and they are thinking that we don't need to worry as much about the gender differences or even the racial differences, as long as we are hiring the best person and all. I was actually having a discussion online recently where somebody was saying that they didn't care what the race of the person was. They just wanted the best surgeon for their job if they were having heart surgery. But I do know that there are still people out there, unfortunately, that have their racial biases and will not necessarily be pleased to have an African American operate on them or a woman come to rescue them, and all in that space. But I just wondered from both of you your thoughts as to whether we need to be concerned about quote unquote quotas in the job, and do we need to improve what is going on in that space?
Steve, you want to take that one first?
Okay. Well, I also, Penelope and Mark, in my previous life, when I was very young after getting out of the service, I worked at a hospital that did heart surgeries. They did bypasses every day. And it was quite, and I worked in ICU as a technician. And when you talk about stressors and things like that, I think it would be interesting. I don't think it matters, but as I worked in corrections for 19 years and then working in a hospital for 2 years, right about 2 years, that what I saw, I also assisted on autopsies. And what I saw, a lot of my drinking and drugging started up at about 19, 20 years old, and when I was working at the hospital. And at the time, I didn't realize that was the reason. I thought, well, I'm young and I like to have a good time and party. And years later, I realized from there's a lot of murders, suicides, a lot of rough stuff that I had to deal with. But, you close your emotions off and, you can deal with it. Basically, you're closing your emotions off, but you're not processing. When you just close off those emotions, like whether it be fear or sadness or whatever it was, like because of the autopsies that I assisted in, it bothered me quite a bit. And I was heavily into the drinking and drugging at that time. But as far as what Penelope was discussing, what was that you said about Penelope, where you were talking about, I had to find my place again here, dealing with the drama, how to alleviate that or avoid that. I know for me, and it's been in my head as we do with our kids, is it's not what's said or what happens to you, it's how you respond to these things. And again, when you consider it, and you don't go back and blame it, well, it's because my parents raised me this way or that way.
Right.
The fact is, though, how you were raised and those neural connections over the years and the same habit of responding to something. And then as you get older, a similar situation may come up and you respond to it the way you would have when you were 14 or 16, which it doesn't work that way. I guess it's more about us evolving and growing and maturing, learning from our mistakes. And for me, that's been the hardest thing. I've created quite a bit of drama in my life in the days that I drank and drugged. And you're not controlling it. That's not even a question. You are that drama. And now a little older and a little wiser, it's about self-improvement. It's about working on yourself daily. Right now, with my partner and her 2 grandchildren, who she has custody of, we live as a family. But I'll tell you what, these kids, they hold up a mirror to me. And when I lose my temper or some thing that you can't get rid of, like some bad habit of responding with anger or something, I'm still working on that. There was physical violence and emotional abuse as a child and growing up in my home. And I do realize that my father, who was part of that, was the source of that. Yeah. He grew up in a home his father came from Italy back in the early 1900s, and I knew my grandfather, and he ruled with an iron hand, so to speak.
Yeah.
And whatever I went through, my father went through worse. And as I look back, and I'm trying to change and trying not to dramatize my life, or because of my temper, or these little idiosyncrasies that we have, it's a daily work. And as you talk to your people in your environment, it's not an easy thing to do. They might say, yeah, okay, but doing it and breaking out of that response that's always seems to be a negative response, and from your early years, today I'm still trying to work through that stuff and get that stuff out. And the kids, if they do something, instead of me being so how should I say, critical, my parents were critical. So that was learned by my parents, and not blaming them, but getting that connection, that change to not be so critical and be more supportive and encouraging, which is what I wanted when I was a kid, and I didn't get. I got very little of that. And it usually came from outside my family. I had that I can go into a whole bunch of stuff, but I don't want to take up my time telling.
There's actually a name for it. What you're going through is called DNA trauma. We hold 5 generations of trauma in our DNA. So your habits that you have relate from your father, your grandfather, your great-grandfather, your great-great-grandfather, and so on. And what happens is that because a lot of these responses aren't learned, they're already integrated. So it's not like, we learned it from someone else. It was already there to begin with. And we're like, oh, I must have learned that from my dad because he used to do it, or he did it when when I was growing up. It's actually in our DNA. So in order to break that chain, you can break that chain in your DNA by what I do with my clients is I actually take them back to their first trauma that they ever remember as a child. And I work with them through finding that you actually go in and you interact with that child as a third person. And you find that what scares them, what traumatized them, and you basically help fix that as an older self. So it's almost like you're doing a regression, but in order to move forward, you kind of have to do that regression, and then you can actually work through basically every single childhood trauma that you've had, and to clear up into adulthood, you can actually change that DNA strand. And once you change that, your girls are actually going to learn that too, because they've learned the old way. They're going to see the change in you, and so are your grandkids or your partner's grandkids. They're going to see that, and then they're going to mimic that behavior, and they're going to notice that, and then they're going to change their DNA strand, whether they subconsciously.
Along those same lines, how much of that is able to be changed in those situations? I've actually, even in the early 60s space that I'm in now, have been in that dating space and all along those lines. And sometimes the DNA people that you are dealing with are not directly yours. For example, Steve just mentioned that he has got grandkids that are his partner's grandkids, and I have definitely dated women with kids and in some cases even grandkids that were not necessarily part of my family heritage and family narrative. So how much of that can do you need to address when you are getting into these relationships, or is that something that you need to let them bring it to you based on their comfortability with you as a potential life partner? It sounds like Steve is definitely with a person that could be a life partner, but I know some of the ones I have dealt with, I was trying to figure out whether we were going to be friends or temporary partners, much less life partners, and all in that space. That decisions was made as the dating process continued, and sometimes the kids influence some of those decisions. But how much of that should be in those conversations, in those dating lanes, in your opinion?
Actually, I think this is something that is a personal thing. It's a personal journey. And
Right.
it's something that you need to work on. And if you feel comfortable sharing that,
Right.
once you've accomplished something and say, you know what, my dad used to do this, I used to be like this, but now I notice it. And a lot of it's acknowledging the trauma, what caused it to begin with. But a lot of that comes with the level of trust you have with that life partner,
Right.
because they're going to recognize that when you talk about it, and they're going to say, oh, they're going to connect with it, saying, you know what, I remember my parents doing this and this, and my grandparents, and then this habit, and it was just a family thing. Well, that family thing is that DNA trauma that's going on, that's passing through the generations. You can change, as you're changing yours, you can influence other people in your life to look back and say, oh, I guess I kind of understand what you're talking about now, because I do this because my parents did this and it didn't work for them and it's not working for me. Oh, maybe I need to change that. It's a realization that something's different. And if they see it and they hear it, they can then experience it.
But
And a lot of
Penelope
times
and
they can experience it on their own.
yeah, but Penelope, and this goes for you as well, Cal, and everything. Don't you feel, because we were talking about it even when definitely, I mean Steve, but definitely when Cal was here as well, we have oftentimes talked about that we are oftentimes afraid to expose the mental health and our own mental health journeys, because I can tell you that there have been relationships that I have been in that folks have told me that they were aware of the person's history, that they had bipolar or other kind of aspects of their history that they either chose not to reveal or reveal much later in the relationship, including some of the impacts of past relationships, because a lot of times people are afraid to expose themselves and be vulnerable in relationships and all along those lines. So how do you broach those subjects? And maybe Steve can show how he broached the subject of even his own health journey when he was dealing with this particular life partner, because I know that there have been cases where folks have said that they recognized that that was not the person for me, and also told me about some of their own histories with certain individuals, and then
Right.
sometimes they would reveal their own history or their own narrative much later in the relationship, and you sometimes wish that you had that information going in versus either going out or in the middle of, and all in that space. But I was just wondering, like Kyle, Steve, at what point did you bring up these conversations in this new relationship?
Well, that I've never had a problem talking about myself. That's it can sometimes it was, making it about me, and that was something that I tried to work on, not making it about me and just being there for others and holding space for others. But I never really had. Well, I did during those days when I was on medications, which I'm not now, but for 12 years I was on medications. I received shock therapy. I had gone through a lot of anguish trying to understand what was going on with me. I hated my job, and that was always something I talk about with coworkers, and I never talked much about it with my then wife. But there was a lot of shame attached to talking about mental illness and weakness, and I went through a lot of that with my own family. I had a big family; there was 7 of us, and not including my parents. But you would appear as weak or be seen as weak, and so you just kept your mouth shut. And of course, in the physical and emotional abuse that occurred growing up, you kept your mouth shut. You didn't talk about it. You didn't cry. If you did cry, you get admonished more. So I believe most of the time when I was going through all of that, I did keep to myself. But eventually, when I did get sober and clean, I had the fortunate experience of seeing the perspective of what we're talking about is one who experienced the emotional physical abuse as a child, working in corrections for 19 years and seeing the results of all that we're talking about that went bad. Um, I worked in child protective services. I'd been a counselor in alcohol and substance abuse rehab. It was a 9-month program, and I got to go to courtrooms, not only in corrections. I did a lot of that, escorting prisoners to courtrooms, but I also got to go to drug court. A lot of these people, they were faced with going to prison or losing their children, and they had to go in that rehab, and they had to do the deal. And what I suppose what I learned from all that, what I've integrated with myself, is being more open and expressing what's going on inside. But at the same time, I had to learn to shut my mouth and listen. Listening was the bigger part of that.
Yes.
And I've always struggled with that because, you know, when you were shut down as a kid, when you find your freedom as an adult, you want to talk, you want to, what you experience, what, you know, this is what I learned, and maybe, you know, pass it on to you. And of course, that can go in the other direction and not such a good way either, because you're talking too much and you're not listening. So, I don't know if that answered your question, Mark.
No, that definitely covered a lot of what I was going in and all that space and everything. Steve, just one really quickly and trying to not divert, but change it just slightly and everything. But one thing I was curious about, because you mentioned being a correctional officer a couple of times and all in that space. And I definitely have friends that have worked in that space. One that was a correctional officer. I think he's now a member of the Durham Sheriff Department and is a deputy in that particular force and everything. But the way society is built, there is oftentimes this portrayal that the prison is a microcosm of society. And I'm not saying that it isn't, but we also know that there is some biases that exist within the court system and all in that space. And it is definitely more minorities throughout the country that are oftentimes in the prison system, but I don't think necessarily that it is more minorities that are committing the crimes. I think that in some cases that there are minorities that don't have the same resources as certain other aspects of the community. So as a correction officer, was that something that you acknowledged was happening? Because I do know that if you look at any prison, whether it's in Durham, whether it's in Philadelphia, whether it's in New York, it is going to be mostly made up of a larger population than their actual population of those that are in the Black and brown communities and all in that space. But I was just wondering, is that a conversation that even correction officers have in those kind of spaces?
Well, yeah, there are those conversations, but they would be more one-on-one. It wasn't like an open thing.
Right.
I think for myself, when I went into corrections in 1981, that was 10 years after the Attica riot, and there was supposed to be a change in the draconian atmosphere of prisons that I don't know if I realized that at the time when I started working that was the case, because in prisons, racism is systemic, I believe. In my book, I talk about some of the things I experienced as a correction officer. I mean, after 19 years, I had to share some of that, which since I'd left corrections in 2000, I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. I grew up in a neighborhood where my father rented our house next door to a Black family. And I had dated the woman that lived next door. Her family, their family was a wonderful family. So I grew up in that kind of environment. That wasn't something that my father or mother that wasn't something they pushed down on us, you know, the hatred or that kind of thing. So when I got to prison, I got to see a lot of the racism and shamedly so, you tend to fall into that yourself, because if you're not one of them, you're one of them, or you're a bleeding heart. And there's a lot of psychological struggle that went on for me. That job was not for me, and I knew that after the third year. I'd resigned, and then I returned to corrections because of benefits, health benefits, and money, and you know, revenue for myself. So when I left corrections, I had to unlearn a lot of my biases that I picked up I wasn't even aware of. and undo that mentality of it wasn't so overt. It was more covert in many cases, and of course, then other cases it was very overt, outright racist remarks and words. I mean, it was a battle for me. I saw a lot of things that I wish I could unsee in corrections that affected me. But again, trying to coalesce my answer here into answering your question, Mark, there was a lot of that. And I think prison reform is, you hear that word and nothing happens. I mean, it's a very complicated thing when you talk about society and prisons and how to treat people who are who break the law, or in a lot of cases, mental illness. People in prisons with mental illness, how they were brought up, they threw people in all together. The general population, whether you're mental ill, you might have been on a medication or here or there, but interacting. I mean, there's so much that goes on in my mind about how an answer to all this. I don't know what that would be. I mean, that's a tough one. I know it's not working the way it is. You're just making people angrier. You're continuing that racist, because it's systemic. It's a systematic thing. I don't believe it was conscious, and maybe other ways, yes, it was conscious, but they're still locking up African Americans as opposed to white. I mean, all that stuff goes on. That's a whole nother show, Mark.
Yeah, we might have to do one of those times and everything. But
well, I just want to say, when I went to a publisher with my book, and it was St. Martin's Press, I think. And when the editor wanted more of corrections in the book, and I put in there what I put in there, how it relates to addiction, mental illness, but to make the book all about corrections was not my goal. I mean, I probably would have done better with my book if you're talking about wanting to sell a book because of sensationalism and what it's like to work in a correction facility and all that went on. Again, I put some of the stuff in there, and there's quite a bit. I think there's a chapter or two, but it was just how it related to my drug and alcohol use and how I handled what I dealt with and, behind the walls. And like most of the guys, there's some wonderful men in there and women, but his coworker said to me many years ago, "We're in a place that no one wants to be." So, yeah.
No doubt about that. Penelope, I alluded to that earlier, but how were you able to face some of the sexism that goes on in the space of EMS and some of that rescue work? Because, like I said, I know sometimes people are not caring that it is a woman coming into the office or rescue them, or sometimes even rescue their pets, but there are others that have those biases that exist and everything. So I was wondering, was that something that had already, that groundbreaking work and had already been done, and it was already enough of you that were in the force, or is that something that is still an issue within the EMS and the rescue space?
It is still in the process. It is still a stigma. It is still a challenge. And ironically, it's not a lot from the patients. It's not, they're at their worst day, and someone comes in to either pull them out of a car that's wrecked or to take their loved one to the hospital. They don't care who it is. Being in Philadelphia, I can tell you right now, there's actually more minorities in the civil service than there are Caucasians. They hire blacks first. They hire women second. They hire white males third. They say they're not racist, or they're all equal employment opportunities. But I can tell you right now, I've applied to a lot of jobs with the fire department, and I can tell you right now, the majority of them are blacks that get hired first. Philadelphia is actually a majority of African Americans. It's the Caucasian population should be the minority. It's tilted that way. It's always a struggle for women in this field because there's so many of the old timers, and I'm going to call. I considering my age, I mean, we're talking like the higher ups here, because okay, I'm at a half a century. So when I say the old timers, I'm talking about the ones that have been in service for 30 years. They still have this mental picture of this is a man's job. This is too tough for a woman. They can't handle it. They can't handle the stress. We have to help them with everything. They're not strong enough. I have a problem with that, because growing up in rural America in Eastern Oregon, where it's ranches and farmland, it was everybody does the job. It doesn't matter if you're a man, woman, or child. You have a duty to do. You have a job to do. Especially working on ranches and farms. It's called survival. Out here in the bigger cities and out in the eastern side, the mentality is that the woman should be home. The woman should be in a secretarial position. The best thing for a woman is, if they're going to be in civil service, is to dispatch, or be in a hospital, go be a nurse. I've worked a year at Jefferson Hospital, where the majority of the nurses I've worked with in the emergency department have actually been men, and the doctors have been the women. So the roles are reversing in the hospitals, but there's still that struggle out on the streets. There are still not very many women who are an officer, a captain, lieutenant. Not a lot of corporals, not a lot of sergeants in law enforcement. You might get a couple of lieutenants. The majority of the higher ranking officers in EMS and law enforcement are men, and women have to struggle. Granted, the mayor of Philadelphia did hire Diane Outlaw from Portland, Oregon, to be the commissioner for the PPD. But he controls her. He tells her how to do her job. Bless his heart. He has a hand in how the police departments run, and she has to follow suit with that, because they're the ones that hired her. She got here right before COVID hit, and she got hit with a massive mess with COVID, and she handled it pretty good. I'll give her that. She handled it pretty good. She has a really good track record out of Portland and Los Angeles. But her hands are tied here, and it's making her look horrible. And you can see it in her facial expressions, in her media reports. When there's an incident, she is stressed out, and it's not from the job. It is from the pressure up above her, which is the city officials who are telling her how to do her job. And they're doing it in such a way that she's getting the fallback from it, and it's making her look bad as a police commissioner, and the police department as, I don't want to work for them. Their numbers are very low for a city of the first class of 5 million people. Their actually police force is half of what it should be, because they can't do what they're supposed to do. They cannot do their job. And it's very frustrating. And Diane Outlaw has to do this job that a man is telling her how to do her job, but yes, she's getting the fallback from him, and she's a woman, because they think she can't do her job because she's a woman and she's in too high of a position and doesn't know what she's doing. But yet she successfully ran 2 police departments in 2 major cities out west and did just fine. So there's a lot of stigma, and it's from the older generation. It's from, I was born in 72, so I'm talking like the 60s and the 70s, and it's just, I'm going to stigmatize here and say it's a lot of the culture of the area. The Philadelphia culture is very influential on how things are run and how things are processed. I'm in a Commonwealth state. It's not even a state of, it's the State of the Union, but it's also a Commonwealth. Philadelphia, as a city of the first class, also has, and I don't understand this because I'm from Oregon. I understand the Oregon law, but Pennsylvania law is confusing on the fact that it's a Commonwealth and the fact that Philadelphia has city ordinances constituted into the state constitution. That they're here's the laws for Pennsylvania, but there's exceptions for Philadelphia that are either, and usually it's an additional amendment to an existing law there's an exclusion to. It's very, I don't know, it's very odd to have one city that has so much control over a state on laws and how it's run. And it's very frustrating. And the fire commissioner is of the same mindset. And he's a white man, but he has a very mindset that he doesn't like certain levels of EMS. He doesn't like basics. He doesn't like advanced. Had all of his trucks staffed with medics and found out that these medics were getting burned out and they had to replace them with firefighter EMTs to drive the medics. And they were paying out so much overtime to these firefighters. And we're talking these firefighters as an entry level was making close to six figures a year because of the overtime. Yeah, I mean, it was just like huge. The EMTs that were already there, they're kind of like grandfathered in, that they're not going to go to a medic. They're not going to go anywhere. They're not going to go to fireside. They want to just drive the truck. One of them that I know, he's been there like 20 years, and he made six figures during right before COVID. And that was before we got into the pandemic. So imagine having all of that plus a COVID going on and no medic staff. Yeah. They had firefighter EMTs, which is basic. The money that was going out for overtime is astronomical just to keep the firehouses open and the squads running of ambulances, because that is such a priority. They run 3,000 calls, about 3,000 calls a month. And some of them even have had to shut down. Now, Theo finally says, okay, well, you know what? We're going to hire EMTs and advanced EMTs, and they're just going to drive. Because now he has to take his words back and actually put into action what he refused to do to begin with and try to catch up. And it's now a cluster, but the majority of the classes are still men. Right. It is a man-dominated thing. They do not encourage women to apply, even though they technically have to have a certain ratio. And even corporations do too, that the higher ups know about, is that when you're a major corporation, you have to have a certain amount of African Americans or of mixed culture or different cultures, and a certain percentage of women as part of your employment ratio, so that you cannot be sued for discrimination. Yeah. It's that thing that you were saying about, I want to hire the best surgeon, but I don't care if he's black or not. That actually is half true, because yeah, you want the best surgeon, but you have to hire that black doctor over a white doctor, even though that white doctor has better qualifications based on your percentage ratios of what the hospital policy may be behind closed doors. And it really rips, because we're supposed to be a society of embracing mixed cultures and trying to get rid of those stigmas. There's so many things going on behind closed doors that we're not aware of, that nobody is supposed to know about.
Well,
but
it's
going
interesting.
on.
Yeah, and it's interesting if you look at what's going on lately, this past year or so, they're actually trying to reverse these things. The Voting Acts, right?
Yeah.
Right? Voting Rights Act. A bunch of this.
The abortion.
They're trying to reverse this. I mean, I don't like to have to talk about politics, because that's been pretty big in our world the past 6 years. But they're right. Penelope, and
but
it's scary how as a people, as this country had gone in one direction for so many years, and then all of a sudden it's flipped, and it's like, let's go back that way. It's like,
it's been crazy in that way, but they've done some innovative things as well. I know that even here in Durham, North Carolina, they've had some gang members that they have been trying to recruit, because a lot of the gang members understand aspects of business and other things, but we don't want them doing illicit or drug illegal things. So they have actually recruited some of them to get involved in the police force, because some of them would know the community better than other parts of the community. So that was actually something that has been going on, and I think they've recruited a few officers that have had some success with that, and all in that space, because they know a little bit about that gang terrain, having come out of that terrain. And I think that that's something that other cities, and I think Philly might have even been looking at that as well, but they've been looking at some programs that will get people involved in that space that are coming out of the illegal space, and because they definitely in some ways are good business people and have some other skill sets, but we wanted to go in a more positive direction along those lines.
Right.
Just like the FBI and the your out government entities will hire hackers to beef up their security system, because there's a saying, you got to think like a criminal to catch a criminal, but also you have to hire criminals to keep away other criminals, and it's kind of a crazy system on how it works. But it does. But now you have to worry about the policing aspect of the accountability of, okay, I have this person that I'm supposed to trust that hacks things, and they're on our computer system. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? You got to have that trust. You've got to have also that rapport with that person that you're bringing in from the outside into a highly sensitive area, and say, okay, if I bring them in and the public finds out about it, what's their reaction going to be? How are we going to work that backlash that comes through it? And I can guarantee you the highest up person is either going to get it or not, but it's going to flow downhill. And it's a tough call, because I can say that my ex-husband was he was a financial wizard, but he was a crook. But he knew finances, and it was like, I don't get this, but okay, this is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And people hired him because he was so good at finances, and it was like, I can't deal with this. It was actually more stressful than being a first responder. That I can understand and deal with, but not that. And our society has become so almost like we have to have that instant gratification, and we don't care how we get it. And we don't care how we get it. We just want it. And it's turned a lot of, it's turned a lot of things upside down, inside out. People don't know who or what they are anymore, and it's almost like when you left your job, Steve. When you left your job, did you feel like you didn't know who you were? You almost felt like you had a loss of identity.
Oh, absolutely.
Because
Oh,
you
yeah.
were you were considered, okay, yeah, Steve's a corrections officer, or Steve worked at this hospital. Steve was always identified with something. We're always identified with something, and as first responders, that's a big deal, because we're the ones that, like I said, we see people on the worst days of their lives, and people identify with this, and Penelope the medic, came in and took care of my dad. Steve, took care of my brother while he was in prison, made sure he was safe and stuff like that. That's an identity, and as soon as you walk away from that, or have to retire, or you have to go on disability, you lose that identity, because now you're just a person,
Yeah,
and
no doubt about
that
that.
stigma comes in.
Yeah,
No doubt about
And
that.
yeah, you don't know who you are anymore.
well, yeah, it's disconcerting, and you spend a lot of time. I think for me, I don't know if I ever really uh, from 20 years ago was in corrections, and I've morphed into different things. I lived out my dream. I did some acting out in LA. I got on some TV episodes, and I always wanted to be an actor, and I did that for a while when I was out living in Arizona. And of course, the horses, that was another identity I had. And that was what I did. I worked in a robotics company for a short time. That's what I did. And yeah, when you leave that, and I guess you might say, you're recreating yourself each time. Um, there's a core part of you that it will never change, and all the stuff outside of that, identifying with your work, that's who I am, or being a husband or a father. When those things go away, which is pretty much where I'm at now, other than now with my life partner, raising her kids who had a rough upbringing. That's what I do now. That's who I am now. I'm the one who takes care of the plumbing, the electrical, taking care of the kids and babysitting them, which they're getting older. There's less of that. But right now, that's who I am. I'm a caretaker. I'm a landscaper. I'm a plumber. I mean, that's what I do. And
Right.
when it comes to life, and I'm not talking to people who don't understand this, but when you try to find an identity in this world, it's hard, especially with technology now. But and there's a lot more people in the world. It's difficult. I again, raising these kids, they hold a mirror up to me, and if they're mad at me, then I was mad at them.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
Who you
How much,
are,
how much of your other work, and we get ready to wind down in a few minutes and everything, but how much of your other work within robotics has played into your conversation as well? Because I know a lot of people have been concerned that the robots are about to invade the world and take over many of jobs, whether that is being a McDonald's worker, or whether that is being a reporter, or a number of other jobs. There are even some people that saying that actors and screenwriters might not have that much of a link in their job and everything because of ChatGPT and other things that are out there. So as one that was involved in some of that space, how concerned are you about us heading into another age? Maybe it's going to be an age of leisure where all of us humans are having the leisure time and the robots are running the world and the universe. But what is your thoughts around that, Steve, since you had some work in that space?
Well, I mean, I didn't work in it very long, but that's a good topic too to talk about. I think that it just occurred to me that could affect people's mental health too. The AI putting people out of work. A lot of this stuff that's going on with they're actually creating people and creating voices of people, and someone can call you up on the phone and get your credit card number and everything because it's they've been able to duplicate your sister-in-law's voice over, and they can put it over the phone. And it's just a whole new world of all kinds of stuff with AI. Some of it, a lot of it, has been great for people, for humanity. But with that, there's always the other side, weaponizing it, people taking advantage of it and stealing your money. I've got mixed feelings myself about AI and excuse me, and the things that come with this growing technology. You keep seeing a lot of these people in the industry saying you need to put the brakes on this. You need to have some regulations. So if those people are even saying that, something's going to have to be done. But then again, when you think about what's going on in politics, the phrase "the people's business" isn't getting done. It's all politicized now and fighting and all this stuff that's going on. The real issues that need our attention aren't getting it. So it's kind of a mixed bag, Mark. It's good and it's bad, and it's going to be left with the generation coming after us to really deal with it. I mean, that's another show altogether too.
Yeah, that's another show, and definitely one of the things
there. But it's like, there's
like I said, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Hopefully, I get both of you back and everything. One thing that I get all my guests to do is if they have any final thoughts that they want to share, and definitely this is a global network, PODTV is, so I always try to get my guests, whether it's on this show or the online dinner party or a number of the other ones, to share their message of positivity and hope. And we've definitely been doing quite a bit of that during the course of this conversation. And if you can also tell folks how they can reach you as we get ready to wind down, but I do hope that both of you, as well as Cal, will make a return trip either on this show or other shows, because I have definitely enjoyed the dialogue, and I hope you have as well. But I'll start ladies first. So definitely, Penelope, if you can tell folks how they can reach you about your business, any message of positivity and hope that you want to share, and any messages that you might not have gotten out that you would like to get out at this particular time.
One thing I want to say is that, being a life coach for first responders and veterans has given me a chance to not only help them, but it helps me too. And finding a way to make a change in their lives, because as first responders, we struggle in paramilitary organizations, and it's hard for us to be human. So working with these veterans and first responders, I get the opportunity to kind of become more human myself, because I find faults and things in myself I need improvement on. So it's a constant learning experience. And that's one thing that I enjoy about working with these people, is that I get to learn stuff, and then I get to pass it on to someone else who is going to learn from it and take what they can from it and pass it on to somebody else. And my goal is that reaching out to one person and spreading that knowledge with them so they pass it on to another, and causing that ripple effect is always good. It causes some eyebrows to raise. It causes some anger issues with some people, because what I touch on is, and I make a point of getting down into the root of the problem. And that's where the healing has to begin, is at the root of the problem. And I actually tend to get yelled at a lot. So I'm actually kind of used to it now. I used to freak out about it with growing up. But now I'm used to it. And I actually encourage that expression of anger, because once you get that anger out, it's a part of that healing as well. Any kind of emotion you have is a part of healing. So anybody that wants to find out more about me can go to my website at https:// and internal-consciousness.ueniweb.com. And then I also have a Facebook page called Internal Consciousness as well. And it's a niche for first responders, veterans, and also frontline workers.
Definitely appreciate that. And by the way, I can definitely relate to the a veterans aspect as well, because me and a gentleman named Captain Newborn, ironically, that is his first name, not his actual military rank, because I don't think Captain Newborn ever served in the military, but using the Apollo model, meaning the famous Apollo Theater there in the New York area. We do a thing called the Road to the Apollo, but it is sponsored by Next Level Veterans and is used as a veterans advocacy tool as well, because we talk about a number of the issues that the veterans have been going through when they have come back, including some of the medical misdiagnoses and some of the other things that they have faced as well, that Captain Newborn oftentimes brings those things in awareness as we are doing this entire talent showcase and all along those lines. And the other thing that I've got to tease you about really quickly, Penelope, is I'm still upset at your team in Philadelphia, because I did go to school at Marquette with Doc Rivers. So I was hoping that he was going to stay another year or two, but hopefully Nick Nurse can bring that championship to y'all. But I was hoping y'all were going to at least keep him for another year or two, but now he'll go into maybe some television announcing, and some other team will pick him up at some point. I think he'll be retired at least for this coming season, but who knows, maybe in the middle of the season or at some point they can pick him up. But I was hoping that he was going to get a second championship, because he did get one with the Celtics. I needed him to get second championship, and I wanted him to get it with Philadelphia, but we'll see where he winds up at all in that. I was not thrilled with that decision.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, he is a schoolmate, and actually his roommate and my roommate were the best of friends, so I did see them all the time. Unfortunately, that roommate that was his roommate passed away. I think it was last year, if I remember correctly, if not earlier this year. But definitely Craig Patterson and myself, Doc Rivers, and Ruben Anthony would sometimes be hanging out in certain spaces together and all in that kind of way. They hung out more than I did, but I still would be in some common spaces with them every once in a while. But definitely he seems to be very much what Steve was just mentioning about one of those people that is about change and causes, and definitely not just giving it lip service, but actually being about the actual business of trying to find ways to make change as an advocate, and both as a coach and as just a private citizen as well. So I definitely admired him for that, even with some of the Black Lives Matter conversations that he was having and getting the athletes to back some of the stuff that was going on in that space, of just sharing that as well. Steve, if you would tell folks about the book one more time and how they can reach you and all along those lines, and any messages that we did not get to that you would like to share, and any message of positivity and hope that you would like to share as well. And then we'll get that little robot that gets me both in and out on this particular show when it's decided to work, and all along those lines. But we'll get ready to wrap it up in another few minutes, but definitely I open the floor to you.
Well, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you, Mark, for having me on your show. It's been very important and very informative for me, having Kyle and Penelope and yourself to talk about these things. I think it's a lot of this stuff is on a lot of people's minds. Mm-hmm. So again, my book, It's an Inside Job Kid, was the book that I published that I hope, that I want to have other people be able to read it, and those who need help, whether it's mental illness, diagnosis, alcoholism, drug abuse, any of those areas, and love. I mean, the love part is throughout that. Mostly shows up near the end of the book, but I want people to know that they're not alone. And I shared some intimate parts of my life, and it's only, I believed it was something that I hope someone would be able to identify with, to help them not to be so fearful of this lousy stigma that mental illness has, and of course alcoholism also. I want this book to also, which this was from my narrator for my audiobook, Ken Camlett, who had said, wait for the miracle to happen, and it will happen. You know, it's just sticking in there, and it's just finding the right people to trust to tell your story, and which may be in a rehab, it may be with a counselor, but to open up and know that you're not alone. You're not alone. Those are some of my messages, but I'm sure you can find more in the book. But I, again, thank you, Marc, for this time to allow me to be here with all of you.
I definitely appreciate it. And like I said before, I hope that both you, Steve, as well as Penelope and Cal will make a return engagement to this show or the online dinner party or to our new show or a number of the other shows that exist on Pod TV. You always have a open door as long as I'm involved to come back and to share any other aspects of your story that you would like to share on other times and both this time frame as well as other parts of the Pod TV family time frames as well. So do know that you are always welcome to make a return trip whenever you want to and all along those lines. So on that note, I'm going to get this robot on out of here, but do know that you are always welcome to make that return trip when you want to make it and are available to make it.
And thank you again, Marc. And again, Amazon, Kindle, and Audible. My book, it's An Inside Job Kid, is on. Thank you again, Marc.
No problem. We're getting ready to get on out of here, and definitely I look forward to that conversation in the near future and all along those lines. If y'all want to stick around, we can talk about just in general possible return trips, but we're going to wrap up this edition of the radio show with Marc Lee, and I'll be back on Wednesday with the online dinner party. And of course, as always in the morning, I'll be there with the World Edition, which is our analysis of news things, and that is always at 10 o'clock in the morning, Monday through Friday. But right now, we're going to get on out of here, and hopefully we'll catch you on some other shows, because I know Maxine has her show that deals with life enhancements and life strategies and all in that space. That's at 7 o'clock. And we've got the All Around Show, which deals with education as well as some entertainment news that is with a teacher that comes our way at 6 o'clock. And I got to get in touch with the car gentleman to see when he's going to start back his car show that is usually Mondays at 10. So there is a number of shows and a number of kinds of conversations that are available here on Pod TV. But right now, let's get on out of here.
All right. Thank you.